Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today. This is a special event because this is our very first WA Q&A webinar session. We hope it will be first of many. I'm Nikki Jovicic from LookUpStrata, and I'm very happy to welcome Scott Bellerby, Managing Director of B Strata. During the session, we'll be discussing everything WA Strata. Please note that the information discussed today refers solely to WA legislation. Please feel free to share the recording of this webinar with neighbours, council members, other staff members, or anyone you think who will be interested in the session. Before we begin, I'd like to mention that the information contained in this session, including the discussions that arise from submitted questions, is not legal advice and should not be relied upon as legal advice. You should seek independent advice before acting on the information contained in this session.
I'm delighted to introduce our panellists today, Scott Bellerby from B Strata. Scott is regarded as WA's leading strata expert. Scott started with Belcourt Strata Management in early 2014 and became Managing Director in 2015. In early 2020, Scott rebranded the business from Belcourt Strata Management to B Strata. He dedicates the majority of his time to growing and evolving the business and managing existing and new developments. Given Scott's passion for strata and broad property experience, he was quickly elevated to President of Strata Community Association WA in 2016. Scott worked extensively for over 5 years with Landgate, the Property Council, SCA WA and the Ministers for Land to ensure a balanced and effective review of the Strata Titles Act was achieved. Scott's ultimate aim is to see the strata industry recognised for its professionalism and expertise, and wants to ensure there's proper regulation and licensing of strata managers. Scott and the team at B Strata are contributors to the LookUpStrata site, and we'd like to say thanks for the support and for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us here today, especially since you woke up in South Australia this morning, Scott. Welcome to today's webinar.
Thanks, Nikki, and good morning to all your viewers.
Thank you. Now, just before we begin going through the submitted questions, I believe you have some information to share with us concerning some really helpful resources that are being created for WA Strata lot owners.
Yes, so with regards to some helpful guides that are coming through, SCA WA recently partnered with Lavin Legal and have now been able to put together some guidelines around bylaw breaches, applications for building works under section 87 and 88, and a list of other forms and templates which are now being made available to the SCA strata managers who are currently undergoing some training with regards to the use of the forms, and then these forms will soon be available to owners as well to help guide them through these challenges in these areas. Further, SCA just approved a communication guideline for owners and their strata managers with the aim of trying to improve that communication piece, ensuring that when emails are sent through that they have the right content and are quickly on point to assist strata managers in more effectively responding to their owners and their resident concerns. And lastly, I know there's been a fair bit of talk around the management contract. I had quite a long conference call with Mark Atkinson, who's been engaged by SCA to prepare the management contract. We're not too far away with regards to finalising or updating the SCA management contract, and I'm hoping that will be available for strata managers and owners within the next 4 weeks. So there's a fair bit happening behind the scenes, and there's a fair bit about to come out over the next few weeks. So certainly look to communicate with your strata manager, and you'll start to see these come out in a not too distant future.
Excellent, thanks Scott. That's a really great overview of what's happening over here in WA. I'll get that information out to people this afternoon when we send the recording of the video through. We'll include a link to the resource of communicating with your strata manager, and we'll also pop a link in there. You can sign up to the SCA WA newsletter, which I think goes out weekly on a Wednesday, I think. Is that right? About Wednesday lunchtime? Yeah, and when that'll have that has lots of information. It's got all of their upcoming events. We always pop the upcoming events in the bottom of our newsletter, but that will be a great place to get the latest information as well. And yeah, we'll get that through to you later today. Excellent. Okay, thank you so much. So yeah, we did receive lots of questions come through, as you would have seen, Scott. I've sent Scott through the list and we've been going through it. So there's a lot there. So we might jump into that straight away if that's okay. And basically, I'll just be reading through the questions one at a time and give Scott a chance to reply to them. So here we go with the first one. I am a lot owner in a complex of 50 apartments in WA. All of my windows were recently replaced by Strata, but there was a lot of damage done during the repairs. I was left with huge layers of thick dust over 2 days and had sore throat and red eyes, and they refused to send a cleaner. The Strata Management Office said someone would call me to arrange a time to fix the damage, but after several attempts to contact the Strata manager, they will no longer reply. What can I do? I've looked into taking the matter to SAT, but the fees are just too high for me to apply.
Yes, yeah, this is certainly a regular challenge that the owners face, and so do strata managers. It appears that the windows have been replaced, and it's hard to understand exactly what they're referring to with regards to damage done during the repairs. But there certainly would be the expectation that during the undertaking of the window replacement, that everything was made good, and if there was any further damage, then those contractors would come back and fix up what damage may have been done. With regards to the mess, it is disappointing that the contractors left the apartment in such a disarray. It is certainly challenging, when you undertake such large project repairs, and in the end, it's difficult to sometimes be quite as reactive as what our owners want at times. I note that the strata manager has stopped responding, which is a shame. But in the end, I'm sure they're trying to get the contractor back to site to try and make good any damage that was done. And with regards to the dust, ultimately, if the cleaner isn't planned at the time of the repairs, it can take several days to get a cleaning team out there, and in some instances you may just need to you're just going to have to do the best you can and clean it up, unfortunately. I think you're on mute there, Nikki.
Sorry, I've got that on mute so that I don't make any noise while I'm typing away. So you don't hear the clicks. Yeah, I'm just saying thank you very much for that. And is there anything about, they mentioned SAT at the end of it, is that their best recourse or not at this stage? Or
well, I would like to think that they can better engage with the strata manager and hopefully and the contractor that undertook the original window repairs. It's hard to understand, it doesn't detail what sort of damage has been done. Is that damage around the window frames, the walls? Maybe it's a different contractor that needs to be brought to site. Potentially, you've had the glazier come out and replace the windows. It may now need to be a carpenter to come out and patch the walls and paint the walls. SAT is really the last resort. I would hope that they can re-engage with the strata manager and maybe also work dealing directly with the contractor that originally undertook the works and see what the next steps can be.
Okay, and I guess at the moment, if they're waiting on contractors to come through as well, like the building industry here in WA is just crazy at the moment, isn't it too? So there could be a delay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. We move on to the next one. Parking for residents is in the locked basement car park of the complex. This area is common property. The Council of Owners have entered into an agreement with the local council to issue infringement notices for parking exceeding 4 hours in the visitors' bays unless the car is registered with the building manager. There's no scheme bylaw or resolution at the last AGM to do this. Is a bylaw needed to be passed to make the changes to common property?
It may be that there is actually a bylaw. The standard Schedule 1 and Schedule 2 bylaws do actually, the Schedule 2 bylaw 1, 2 does talk about parking on common property. So there may be something there that does talk to this problem. But ultimately, the function of the strata company are to be performed by the council. as long as they've been authorised under Section 118. So, yeah, it's anticipated that you can't obstruct common property. There is nothing prohibiting the council from entering into agreement with the local council to help police the use of the visitor car parking bays, as long as they've been authorised under Section 118. Saying that, a bylaw does help clarify it all and also provides some better structure around how the visitor bays may be managed. So I would certainly encourage them to think about registering a bylaw to that effect. But yeah, with wheel clamping going and limited avenues to be able to police car parking, visitor car parking, entering into agreements with local council is the best way forward for most strata companies.
Okay, thank you. Moving on, division of common area work and exclusive use area work. A committee instructed the strata manager to include exclusive use area work, their own, with work in the common area, and sent a miscellaneous invoice to all owners when the work was not requested or needed by every owner. This additional service for exclusive use areas is not specified in our contract with the strata manager. Should the manager have refused the request, are the actions of the committee in contravention of the Act?
Okay, so again, it would be very beneficial to know what the exclusive use bylaw says around the maintenance of exclusive use areas. It's generally anticipated that the maintenance within this exclusive use area would generally fall onto the owner. Saying that, sometimes they do put the onus on the strata company to maintain. So yeah, it is a little bit difficult to answer, but assuming the exclusive use bylaw puts the onus on the owners, I guess there's a couple of steps that should have been followed. In the end, the strata company via the strata manager should give notice to the owners around the need to potentially undertake maintenance within their exclusive use area. And then, the strata company may reserve the rights to step in and make those repairs. I don't know what has been undertaken, from this inquiry, so it's hard to really talk to it further. Should the strata manager have refused the request from the council of owners? As long as the strata manager was informing the council around where the boundaries of maintenance of exclusive use areas are, and the council's been happy to instruct otherwise, it's not generally the strata manager's position to refuse the direction of a council. Are the actions of the committee in contravention of the Act? There has been precedent set that suggests the strata company shouldn't be maintaining exclusive use areas where the bylaw details that. But again, without actually knowing and being able to read the bylaw around exclusive use, I'm not willing to suggest that they have contravened the Act.
Okay, and can we just you mentioned about the strata manager refusing the request. I think there is generally, we find confusion with lot owners and generally thinking that the strata managers are the ones that are actually running the council rather than the council instructing the strata manager. So are you able to talk on that just for a few minutes, Scott?
Yeah, absolutely. Like in the end, as I highlighted previously, Section 135 talks about the functions and the constitution of the council, and ultimately the role of the council is to perform all the duties of the strata company, and the strata manager is a contracted service supplier to the strata company, and we need that direction from the council with regards to most of the duties we undertake on behalf of the strata company. As long as we're informing the council and providing our expertise around the legislation and helping keeping them informed on the bylaws that also govern the scheme, it then falls to the council of owners to whether they want to take on that advice. or wanted to instruct us differently. Ultimately, as long as we feel that it's not going to cause significant detriment to the scheme, by and large, and as long as we inform the council along the way, we generally tend to do what the council asks us to do.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. We do have a lot of questions that come in around that issue, so that's great to have that clarification. And we have another one here. Our strata is made up of both residential apartments and a resort. My unit is in the residential part of the resort that backs onto it. The resort units are owned by individuals, but 80% is owned by the company who purchased the resort. The residential units are all owned individually. The problem is the very high strata fees the residential owners pay. Each time we want to discuss having these fees reduced, the majority vote of 80% in the resort by one owner overrides all residential votes. No matter what we want, if it doesn't suit the majority owner, this is voted out. This is so frustrating, as it is as though the residential owners have no say whatsoever unless it agrees with the majority owner's vote. Is there anything we can do to balance this out where the residential owners have a voice that counts?
Yeah, again, these conflicting uses within schemes always generate conflict, and with the introduction of the Community Titles Act later this year, hopefully better management plans can be put in place to avoid these conflicts. Around this particular matter, in the end, Section 137 details general duties and conflicts of interest regarding a council member. At all times, they have to act honestly and in good faith, take due care and diligence, and must not make improper use of their position to benefit. It's a very tight line that has to be walked around the management of this scheme. Ultimately, if they are one owner, they can only hold one position on the council. So what it really comes down to is working with the residents around the election of the council of owners and trying to get good representation on the council of owners to be able to have better informative discussion around the management of the scheme. That's probably all you can really do there. But I guess when you buy into the scheme, you're presented with the bylaws and you're presented with the budget. So I guess there is an expectation you do your due diligence when you buy in. And in these types of schemes, you do find that the levies are quite high. But they need to be equitable and they need to be apportioned appropriately. So the only advice I can give here is trying to get better representation on the council of owners.
Okay, thank you. I live in a strata committee of 64 units built approximately 30 years ago. When we purchased, we were told we owned the cubic space of the unit, a numbered carport and a backyard courtyard. When these units were built, they attached a wooden pergola to each unit courtyard. It's bolted to the guttering of the roof uncovered. Each owner at their own expense attached a cover to the pergola to their liking and expense. The pergola's common property.
Okay, there's a few warning bells here in that it doesn't actually refer to an exclusive use bylaw. It talks about that they were told that they own the cubic space, but my first suggestion is they need to go back to the strata plan, see if they actually do own the cubic space of their carport and courtyards. Often there is a lot of confusion around this. Owners might see that in their car bay that it's got unit 10 written in it, but if it's not actually registered as lot 10 on the strata plan, then they don't actually own it and it is common property. So it's important that they first refer back to the strata plan and to the bylaws and any exclusive use bylaws, just to ensure that they do own their carports and their courtyards. In these older schemes, generally they don't, and they've been misinformed with regards to their ownership of the courtyards. But let's assume that they do own the courtyards, and if the pergolas have been constructed in the courtyards at the time the scheme was built, then any improvement to those pergolas actually requires an application by the owner to the strata company. So any sheeting that may have been put on has probably, if they don't have an approval, has probably not been put on with approval. And this is where it becomes challenging, because where you sit here is the strata company could insist that the owners remove the sheeting if they don't have approval. If they don't, then arguably, assuming it is common property, then it is the strata company's responsibility to maintain.
And there are a few other issues there when I read that question, particularly, Scott, too. If it sounds like everyone's gone about it their own way, and they've probably got a bit of a mismatch of materials and just general appearance of the lot from the exterior of the scheme might be a bit, a bit piecemeal as well.
And that is what happens with these older schemes. You know, everyone has their own pergolas. They do their own thing. In the end, they often haven't sought approval from the strata company, and the strata company probably hasn't properly regulated it. So they end up in this position at the end where it's very hard to then step in and say, take it all down. But then it also becomes detrimental to other owners that they've done the right thing. And then there's this obligation for the strata company to now maintain it all. So, yeah, ultimately you just have to draw that line in the sand, and putting in proper bylaws around improvement to property would be very beneficial and maybe help get them out of this mess going forward.
Okay, and a lot of the times those bylaws refer to who is responsible to maintain that work into the future, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay, excellent, thanks. We've got one. I live in a strata complex in WA, and I'm on the Council of Owners. With recently introduced laws covering maintenance of common property, we had a 10-year maintenance plan report carried out and created a fund out of levies to cover all of the listed items. The complex is in a strong financial position, which is really good to hear, with 30,000 surplus funds in the administrative fund, separate to the maintenance plan fund, and that's growing every month. The Council of Owners had suggested a recent AGM that we could afford to paint the fascias and guttering on each unit out of the $30,000 surplus as a way of keeping the exterior of the complex, which faces common property. However, the strata company has rejected this request, saying it's not common property and not payable out of these funds. With a maintenance plan in place, there is a lot of excess funds. Can we, as a Council of Owners, enforce expenditure for items other than common property? And is there a need to keep building such a surplus?
So in this instance, I'm assuming that the boundaries to the lots are to the external surfaces, and therefore an owner's responsibility. In the end, the council can't enforce the expenditure, particularly if at the AGM the owners voted against it. In the end, at any AGM, if a motion is put restricting actions of the council, then the council can't contravene those motions. And likewise, if the strata company passes motions requiring the Council of Owners to do certain works, the Council of Owners can't refuse that instruction. So they can't enforce the expenditure. With regards to the surplus funds, if they've had the 10-year maintenance plan undertaken, then that gives them a guideline around what their future expenditure on maintenance of common property would entail. So that's their best guide to determining, do they need to keep building any surplus within their reserve. you can structure bylaws that enable the strata company to maintain owners' lots, and this is particularly relevant where you have the strata plan, which puts the boundaries to the external of the lot. Because when you have this on a building, if you can't expect the owner to paint the outside of the building, and it could end up in a patchwork quilt if you did undertake that. So it is generally anticipated that you would pass a bylaw empowering the strata company to maintain certain items of the owner's property, which is generally the painting of the external boundaries of the lots. So that would perhaps be the next best suggestion, is they get that bylaw drafted and introduce it at the next general meeting of the strata company so that they can undertake these works.
Okay, and is it usual for the strata company to have excess of surplus funds in the administrative fund like that, or?
Again, yeah, $30,000. It doesn't really detail the size of the scheme, so it's hard to say is that surplus, and without actually knowing what makes up the common property, it's hard to determine if that is a surplus or if it's just a reasonable amount. Like as I suggested, the 10-year maintenance plan will give them the best guide to what needs to maintain within the scheme, and then what needs to be raised going forward over the next 10 years. So I strongly encourage them to refer to the 10-year maintenance plan and identify those items which they are responsible for and do need to be actioned, and budget accordingly. If they can reduce the reserve, then that's great. But yeah, refer back to the 10-year maintenance plan.
Okay. Does the strata company have the final say over the Council of Owners on how monies are expended from an administrative account with a large surplus that is separated to the maintenance account?
So I guess just referring back to the previous question, Section 102 says that the strata company must have a budget for each financial year, which must be approved at the annual general meeting of the strata company. It's important that the budget takes into account the 10-year maintenance plan and also any bylaws that may stipulate other schedules that may also need to be raised where you've got conflicting uses within the scheme. So yes, the strata company approves the budget at the annual general meeting, and the council has limited capacity then to expend outside of that budget. They can identify an expenditure item and go to the strata company and seek approval for additional expenditure. Alternatively, they do have the ability to spend up to $500 per lot on unbudgeted items as well. So there is a little bit of scope for the Council of Owners with regards to expenditure outside of the budget, but without knowing the size of the scheme and what might need to be expended, that spending capacity of the council is hard to determine. But it's ultimately the strata company controls what the budget is, and that's what gets approved at the annual general meeting, and that's what the council is required to try and adhere to.
Okay. I recently received a letter from the committee stating that they have decided all strata fees have to be paid within 30 days of receipt from invoice. Can this be enforced?
So after passing the budget at your annual general meeting, you then actually approve the levy schedules and the dates that the levies are to be raised and fall due. In the end, the owners vote on that, and you have to, generally it's quarterly. Some schemes we actually see biannually, some schemes we actually see annual levies, but those dates are enshrined at the annual general meeting of the strata company. So you are aware when the levies fall due by reading the minutes or attending the annual general meeting of the strata company. So this is a little bit challenging in that it's not 30 days from receipt of the invoice. It's actually the day that the levy determines it's due and payable. In most instances, a strata manager would issue a levy 3 to 4 weeks before it's due, but the owner has the responsibility to pay that before the levy is due, and then after that date, yes, it will incur interest. The current prescribed rate is 11%, unless the strata company has passed a motion that determines a lesser rate. And yes, the strata company can then start undertaking debt recovery procedures. Saying that, it is encouraged that they have a bylaw to assist that debt recovery, or at least as a minimum pass a motion at each annual general meeting detailing what those debt recovery procedures may be.
Okay, and to be an unfinancial owner, there are some penalties as well in regards to your position. So do you mind going into those?
So if at a general meeting you are unfinancial, you're limited on your capacity to be able to vote on ordinary resolutions and special resolutions. So yes, you do need to be financial to be able to vote on the motions. It doesn't preclude you from voting on unanimous resolutions and resolutions without dissent. But ultimately, the strata company relies on its owners to pay the levies to assist it in continuing to operate. So it's very important that the strata company is able to get that money. And in the end, there were a lot of concerns early last year when COVID hit that we would see an increase in debtors. But talking to my colleagues across Australia, that there isn't really any evidence of that at the moment. It is really important that the strata company does have means to be able to breach owners if they're not paying their levies.
Okay. Okay, this is a bit of a long one, so bear with me. Our building has an on-site caretaker. Some owners are concerned about the legality of this engagement. There is concern about the possibility that the strata may be in contravention of superannuation laws and may become liable for long-term leave and back payment of other leave should the contract be terminated. The caretaker is employed on a contract and has an ABN. He's paid bi-weekly on a submission of an invoice. He does not work for any other entity. He provides his own equipment to perform his tasks, but is reimbursed for costs incurred, example, garden items, maintenance items, etc. He lives on site in an apartment provided for him by the strata. He's not required to be on site personally and is permitted to employ a replacement person to be available. He must work 4.5 hours per day, Monday to Friday, and 2.5 hours on Saturday. The hours are not specified. Contract provides for a 90-day notice period. He's paid a fixed annual amount. From this, the monthly market-related rent is deducted for the apartment in which he resides. He's paid no super contributions. He's given no annual sick leave or annual leave, and he accrues no long service leave. Is there any irregularities with this arrangement?
Yes. I strongly encourage the owners in this scheme to refer to the Fair Work Act and actually seek legal advice around this matter. I'm not an employment lawyer or specialist in that field, but the warning bells that are going off for me is that he doesn't work for another entity and that he has fixed hours on site. I'm not going to say any more than that, but I would really encourage the owners here to quickly seek some advice on this. There could be some significant ramifications and liabilities that they may incur.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Scott. That might be a bit of a warning bell for other people out there that are in similar situations as well.
It's always a difficult one. Owners, I don't think, appreciate what it means when they employ a caretaker or an employee for the strata company, but effectively they become an employee of all the owners, and the owners have an obligation as an employer to adhere to the Fair Work Act, particularly around how they're managed and any concerns or breaches that may come up. So it's not a simple matter to just say, I'm going to terminate you. You can't do that to your staff. You actually have to go through workplace management requirements. You have to handle it very carefully.
Okay, thank you. We have another one about parking. I reside in an apartment near the city. It's a 9-level building that has 40 units and 50% owner occupied. I'm a member of the Council of Owners. Each unit has a dedicated parking bay. The building has 4 visitor parking bays, and our building rules and guidelines specify who may use these bays and for how long. However, the rules are not included in the bylaws. The only reference in the bylaw is a clause that reads as follows: a proprietor, resident or occupier of a lot shall not stand or park any motor vehicle or other vehicle upon common property except with the written approval of the strata company. The area has a notice clearly displayed and referring the City Council law under which the parking is controlled. We experience ongoing problems with both owners and tenants parking in the area. We also have issues with other outside people parking in the bays for extended periods. The sentiment of the chairman of the Council of Owners is that there is very little that can be done. He believes that whilst it's bad faith for an owner or tenant to park in these areas, they are legally entitled to do so. It has been suggested that bollards be erected and controlled by a full-time caretaker, but this is onerous. It's further been suggested that the bays be leased to residents on a rotation basis for 6 months and that they are charged a monthly fee for the use of the bays. These funds would be paid to the Strata Reserve Fund. Are there any formal avenues that can be followed to prevent the improper use of the bays? Are residents permitted to use the bays? And would the strata be allowed to lease the bays to residents on a rotation basis and charge for the use?
Okay, so the first question, are there any formal avenues that can be followed to prevent improper use of the bays? There is already a bylaw that says that you can't park on a common property or obstruct common property. It is a very simple bylaw, and expanding on that bylaw to have a more detailed car parking requirement and use of the visitor bays would be beneficial. If they've entered into an agreement with the local council, depends what local council it is. You're in a city, localities generally allow for the ability to put up the signs and then call a ranger to site to issue an infringement. And we find that that's the best way to manage it. But you do you should work with the owners around and the residents around that policing of the bays and make sure it's clearly explained to them. But the strata company can restrict the use of the bays. It is intended that they're for visitors, not for permanent residents to park in. I think being a little bit more engaged with the local council around the policing the bays would be beneficial. The next bullet point, are residents owners permitted to use these bays? Well, when the scheme's approved, there's a requirement, probably under the development application, and when the development approval is issued, that the scheme has visitor car parking bays. So the removal of those car parking bays for the visitors would potentially require a development application to the local council, and it would be intended that those bays are exclusively designated for visitors. So I would say that the residents aren't permitted to park in the bays. You do need to have visitor bays for when you have guests come around and visit you within your lot, and you need somewhere for them to park. So you wouldn't want them taken up by residents parking there full time. The last bullet point, would the strata be allowed to lease these bays to residents on a rotational basis and charge for the use? By and large, a lot of schemes, the car parking bays are actually common property. So a lot of schemes do actually lease their car parking bays. But I would suggest that taking out the visitor bays to the scheme would be complicated it would be detrimental, I believe, to the visitors coming to the scheme. And I would encourage them not to lease up the visitor car parking bays and take them out of use for those people coming to visit them.
Okay. We seem to have a few parking questions. So here's another one that we're just about to cover as well. Yeah. It is a lot different to the ones that we've covered. I am the owner of 2 units in a strata development. Each unit in the complex has been allocated a car bay and an attached storage facility indicated on the strata plan. Each of my units has a car bay and a storage unit attached. I reside in one unit and rent the other unit out. The car bay attached to my rental unit is my preferred bay. Therefore, I use this bay and allocate the bay attached to the unit in which I reside to my tenant. I want to formalise this arrangement by exchanging the bays and storage units. Is it possible? What process do I need to follow? Does the Council of Owners need to approve the change? Would the change need to be approved in an AGM? And would this be considered a sale purchase arrangement on which stamp duty is payable?
Okay, yes, it can be achieved, but it's an amendment to the strata plan. So you're actually going to need to get a surveyor to actually redraft the strata plan around where the car bays and the storage units are and amend the numbering to reflect the preferred unit usage. That's unanimous resolution. So yes, it will have to go to a general meeting of the strata company. Unanimous resolutions are now easier to pass in that if, while it requires every owner to vote in favour of the motion and no one can vote against it, if you haven't voted, generally after the 28 days, it's a deemed approval these days. So it does make it easier to get a unanimous resolution passed, but it is going to be a challenging prospect for this owner to be able to amend the strata plan, and it will cost them a little bit of money to get there.
And I guess that would come into play if they ever sell one of the units, really, either one of them, and if they're wanting to stay in their unit and use the other car parking bay, they would have to resolve it before the sales process would go through, or would there be a opportunity to
have to resolve it if that was the case? Like it could be even more complicated depending on what the bylaws say. You generally can't lease your car bay. And given this change, this swapsies which they've done around his preferred unit and the unity, well, the preferred car bay and the unit he resides within, that may create some complications around the leasing arrangement. But yes, ultimately, if he looks to sell one of the units, he would have to go down this process, or he'd just have to park in the bay that's been allocated to his lot.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I have been a committee member for 17 years. We have tried several methods to address contravention issues at times. Now that the new act is in place, is there a template available as an alternate to using a lawyer to draft a letter every time an issue arises? Or can you suggest another alternative?
Yes, I did address that at the very start, and SCA now has released guidelines around bylaw breaches and also has templates to assist strata companies and strata managers in issuing breaches to residents. So,
excellent. And when we publish this, we might include the links to those resources as well in that question, Scott, so that everyone can access those, which is really great. Thank you. I am the owner of a unit in a complex of 27 units. The whole complex is more than 50 years old and shows signs of ageing. At strata meetings, there's interest in selling the whole complex to a developer, but there are 8 units that stubbornly will not ever sell. Can we force the issue? As I was told, the new strata rules allow a majority to override. What's the legal position?
So firstly, I guess it's always important to point out that Section 91 the general duties of the strata company require that they must keep in good service, repair, properly maintain, and if necessary, renew and replace the common property. So there is a positive obligation for schemes to maintain their buildings. By the sounds of it, this complex is now starting to show signs of its age, and depending on where it's located, you may see that the underlying land value exceeds the gross realisation of the units. The new legislation did introduce termination of schemes, Part 12 of the Act. It is quite detailed and fairly onerous, but it's not a majority vote. It's actually an 80% requirement that owners vote in favour. If it's 27 units, they need 22 units to vote in favour of the termination of the scheme. So if he's suggesting that there's 8 units that stubbornly refuse not to sell, it would be very challenging for them to be able to achieve an outcome that sees the scheme terminated. Ultimately, I think they need to get their 10-year maintenance plan undertaken and look to get ahead of some of those maintenance issues that seem to be a concern now.
And possibly even when they had the 10-year maintenance plan drawn up, it would draw the attention to how much money they're needing to put away, wouldn't it? And then maybe some of the people that aren't looking to sell might reconsider their situation when they see what sort of money they'll need to put into it over the next 5 and plus years, 5, 10, 15 years.
It's certainly a big debate with some of our older schemes that we're seeing right now, particularly in the western suburbs, where you have such a high land value. We are having these discussions with our owners on a very regular basis around about what their strategic plan should be going forward, particularly when they do get a 10-year maintenance plan. And there might only be 8 lots, and yet you've got concrete cancer, you've got subsidence, and some of these very expensive maintenance issues that need to be addressed. Owners are now starting to question, well, do we want to have to keep paying, or contributing $100,000 a year into a reserve for such a small scheme? Or do we now have to think about realising the underlying land value and potentially terminating the scheme and moving on?
Thank you. Okay, this is an interesting one. Why does the strata industry continually refer to the Strata Titles Act 1985 when the version has been superseded with a 2018 version, thus rendering the earlier 1985 version obsolete?
So the 1985 Act wasn't repealed. It's only been amended. So it is still referred to as the Strata Titles Act 1985 because that's what it is. That's why you'll find a lot of drafting irregularities, I think, in the new legislation, because you have the old terms and you've had different drafters over the last decade preparing the amendments, and there are some inconsistencies now in there. So it is actually still the 1985 Act that's just been updated.
Thank you. Thanks for the clarification around that. Okay, we've probably got time. We're kind of drawing to the end of the time that we had. So we might just cover one more question, and then we've just got a few comments to make at the end of it. So this one, does the Strata Council require the authority of the Strata Company to amend or add buildings on the common property?
So one of the new things in legislation that came about was section 91(2), which the Strata Company actually may improve or alter the common property. So under the old legislation, you actually weren't allowed to improve the common property. What you had, you were stuck with, and you couldn't value add to it. So with the amendments to the legislation, you've now actually got that ability to improve common property. And a lot of large schemes with excess land, now have an opportunity to better utilise that land and maybe improve it. So yes, the Strata Company can improve common property. Can the council undertake that decision? No, they actually need to pass a special resolution to be able to improve the common property if the expense of it is more than $500 per lot.
Okay, and under that section as well, that was the section that dealt with the improvements to things like solar as well. Is that right, Scott?
Yeah, so sustainable infrastructure, it's a different resolution. It is a ordinary resolution. And again, one of the great things to come out from SCA in the last week is the guidelines around how you can now add sustainable infrastructure to your scheme, which complement the Section 87 applications for improvements and works to lots. I think a lot of people don't understand that any structure being added to the scheme requires a Section 87. It doesn't have to be structural alterations. It's just alterations of the lot. So, by and large, they do have to make an application under Section 87, or if it's a survey strata, Section 88, to improve their lot. and that is a resolution without dissent. Alternatively, they can go to SAT under Section 90 to and bypass the strata company if they want to.
Okay. And it's great, yeah, great to see that there are more resources coming out through SCAWA. That's fantastic. Then that we'll have that one to refer to as well. And once again, we'll share that with our audience as soon as we're able to. So thank you for that. Okay, well, thank you so much. I mean, we've covered so many questions there. I know that we have a lot of questions that have either been submitted here in the chat or they've been submitted to us via email. We had so many questions come in. We've always got lots of questions coming in from WA, but we did have an awful lot coming ready for the webinar today. So please, if you've submitted a question and we've run out of time before we've actually been able to address it, if you can go to our Ask a Strata question page on the LookUpStrata site, you'll see links all over, even the front page, and it's in our menu at the top of the site. Please submit the question again there and we'll do our very best to answer it. It might take us a little while to get back to you because we do have so many questions coming in. Sorry, excuse me, just a second, quickly. We've just got one really quick question that's coming through chat, Scott, which I might read out if you've got time, Ken. Scott, quickly chat about STA in stratas. Has anything been addressed, or is this up to each strata to individually manage and address with local council? Many thanks. Is that something you could address, or?
Chat about the Strata Titles Act in stratas? I'm not quite sure what they're referring to. Yeah, in the end, if it's manage and address, individually manage and address.
Oh, Airbnb short stays.
Okay. Yeah, Airbnb is a very complicated matter. Most local councils are taking a more proactive approach and adopting regulations and guidelines around short stay accommodation. There was the short stay inquiry, which was handed down around about 2 years ago, and to date government hasn't really progressed very far on a number of those recommendations, and have pretty much left it up to individual councils to regulate, which is a shame because there was a lot of positive feedback to come through those that inquiry. In the end, it generally is a requirement in most inner suburban localities that an applicant has to make an application to the local council to be able to use their apartment for short stay, because it effectively is a change of use. When the scheme's approved, it's approved as a residential lot, and there's been cases that have decided that a residential lot should be used for the permanent address of a resident, not for the short-term lease of a resident. Putting bylaws in to restrict short stay is very complicated. And while you've got the case in Rivervale where they were successful in limiting the use of short stay within their scheme through bylaws, I think there has been some debate about whether that would still get up if it was challenged. Ultimately, my recommendation is that you need to adopt a bylaw that provides stronger governance around the use of short stay, and there's some really good guidelines out there about how a strata company could go about that. I don't think you can just say no, but you can say yes, but subject to all these requirements. And that might be checking in and checking out times, potentially bonds to be paid when an applicant wants to use their lot for short stay. There's all kinds of requirements, how they access. It may be that you do have to provide alternative pickups for keys and access to lots and schemes outside of the strata plan. There's I don't think you can say no, but I do encourage strata companies that are facing that problem to look to draft a a guideline or a bylaw that tightly regulates the use of lots for short stay use.
Okay, and that guideline you mentioned, is that an SCAWA resource as well, Scott, or?
It is something that came about through the inquiry into short stay, and I've drafted a guideline around that, which has been used in some new schemes. I would encourage owners to have a look at the inquiry, and it did talk about how you could better regulate the use of short stay in their schemes, and use that as a template to draft a guideline that would be more appropriate to their individual schemes.
Okay, and we might try and get the link to that out as well to our audience this afternoon. So thank you very much. All right, thank you for addressing that very last question that we've got time for. So before we go, I'd just like to say a really big thank you to you, Scott, for taking the time out of your very, very, very busy schedule. Some of the information there, I mean, it was just fantastic, really, really in depth and very practical, and able to be used straight away. So hopefully all of our audience got some really great pointers out of there and some direction. I just found out about something really exciting that's happening with B Strata. You told me this morning. So if you'd like to share that with our audience, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, I guess we've got a couple of great things which we're looking to bring to market. In the next several weeks, we'll be releasing an app for all of our owners, and which we really hope will improve that communication, that transparency for residents within schemes around maintenance, applications for users within the scheme, and also provides community chat sites, buy, sell and swap platform for owners, booking platforms. So we're really excited about the introduction of the app, and for any of our new owners that are coming through, we're also offering a healthcare check on their scheme. So if you do sign up with B Strata, we get the 10-year maintenance plan. We come through and we prepare a 1-year maintenance quote, and a real detailed health check on the scheme to help owners be a little bit more focused on the delivery of their 10-year maintenance plan. So that's sort of where we're heading. We're pretty excited about some of the new products we are delivering to market, and we look forward to working with our owners and new owners over the next several months.
Excellent. That sounds fantastic. It sounds really exciting. I might have a look at that myself and see what you've come up with. That sounds great. So thank you very much for sharing that with us today, and also for sharing all of that information. Thank you to our audience for joining us. We're really grateful that you've taken the time out of your day to come and sit with us and have a chat. We hope to see you at one of our regular sessions in the future, and please keep an eye out for upcoming LookUpStrata events and our regular publications. And don't forget to watch out for the next edition of the WA Strata magazine. So thank you very much again, Scott, and thank you, and goodbye to our audience.
Thanks, Nikki. Thanks, viewers.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye.